President Trump confronts national and international humiliation. Why? Because, he's talked incessantly about bullying and dominating Iran, about bringing it to its knees, about unconditional surrender, regime change, and so forth and so on. He did all of this at the behest of Mr. Netanyahu and the billionaire Zionists who surround Trump, who helped put him in the White House. This is not something that the United States needs to be involved with. First, we're not really dependent on the oil that comes out of there, but more important, we don't really have an interest in disrupting the world's oil supply, as we are now discovering, because the ramifications for the rest of the world, for our friends in Asia, for our friends in Europe, are catastrophic. But that's where we are. Now, if you're facing humiliation, it means that you can't change this condition. You can't alter the circumstances. We don't have the ability to do that. That's something that he refuses to admit publicly, and I imagine privately. And I think what we're looking at the moment is a 5-day break during which he's trying to find a way out, but at the same time to build up this ground force designed to seize islands inside the Persian Gulf. That's about all there is to it. Now, is there any way out for him? Is there an off-ramp? Well, I think he's shut all of those with his big mouth. So that means he's got to stand up and say, I was wrong. I can't do these things. I made a decision to disengage our forces, and we will sit with the Iranians and try to put together an agreement that minimizes the harm that I've done to my own country and our allies. I don't think that's going to happen, Dan. Do you? So,
yeah, I can't imagine I would do that.
Yeah, so I don't think he's going to do that. So that means he bought 5 days. They're going to look for every way they can find. They'll turn to anybody, whether it's Pakistan or India or any country in the world that might be able to, in their view, help them. But these people, although I have no doubt that the Pakistanis, the Indians, and others are very sincere, we've reached a point now where the Iranians have no incentive to cooperate. They have no incentive to sit down and listen to us. They don't really believe anything we say, and they've got a lot of evidence to support that position. We don't carry through in what we say. We lie repeatedly. And in the midst of lying at negotiations, we set them up for attack. So I think the Iranians right now are doing what they're doing because they're waiting for something to break globally. And I think that's coming. They're also looking at us, and they're not fools. Our financial position is very weak. And it's not difficult at all for our financial system to crash at this point.
Right. Not actually going to cover some
finance the war. What do you do?
Exactly. And I'm actually going to cover the financial aspects of this. It's obviously not part of the narrative in the Western media. And I want to touch on that because one of the other things he said in there, which is just self-evidently untrue, is he claimed that, they bragged about having these nuclear materials, and instead of deterring me, that actually launched me in. Well, as we've talked about, I think you and I have, and definitely on our show last July, where Ted Postal went in and detailed 400 plus kilograms of reprocessed 60% material and the 10 to 11 bombs they could make. So it's obviously been out there in the open source for a long time. They're claiming, the president is claiming, that they discovered this in the last round of negotiations, and that's what prompted him to launch on this imminent threat, et cetera. You would think ordinarily the so-called fifth estate, to where the media in America would ask hard questions and go down the path to say, hey, these things aren't lining up, especially stuff that's gross like this. Instead, Doug, not a shock, but I just want to demonstrate it. We are seeing the exact opposite. What we're seeing is media members and members of President Trump's political friends bending over backwards to continue to tell you, yes, this war is good and we need to keep going. Here's a few examples. First of all, we're going to have Laura Ingraham on Fox News talking with the former deputy director of the NSC, a gentleman named Mr. Greenwell, who's going to say, first of all, here, you know what? I don't believe anything the Iranians say. Don't ever listen to the Iranian side. Just listen to us.
I never thought I would see this in the United States of America, but the American press, seemed to believe what Iran was saying. Well, Iran is saying that they're not really talking about a deal. They kind of poo-pooed the idea of a 15-point plan that was essentially agreed to by Iran. But I guess that's where we stand now, that ABC, NBC, CNN, they'll actually take the Iranian points of view at this point seriously?
No surprise that too much of the media enterprise is sympathetic to our adversaries. Look, 3 quick points, and you hit the most important. The only numbers that really matter are the fact that the United States and Israel are intercepting 92 to 94% of what's left of the Iranian inventory. And second, 100% of our strikes are successful. There's nothing the Iranians can do about it. You're 100% right. It is just a matter of time. We need to let the president cook.
Yeah, we need to let the president cook, because 94% of all incoming Iranian stuff is knocked out. But you know, you don't have to look very far than Dimona and Irad and Tel Aviv today in the daylight, and somehow that 94% doesn't seem to be squaring with reality.
Well, no, but then nothing does right now in terms of what the reality is presented inside the Beltway. This nonsense is going to continue. Keep 2 things in mind. First of all, who's paying for everything? Who owns the media? You know, who's taken ownership of these big media corporations? Where do they stand? Where are their loyalties? Well, most people on any given day in the media dislike Donald Trump, but they strongly support what he's doing to support Israel. So if you start following the money, you can answer that question pretty quickly. And if you want to keep your job at Fox News, you're going to say exactly what Laura Ingraham says. And this, of course, sets up the false argument. Well, if you don't agree with us, if you don't say what we're saying is true, that our strikes are 100% effective, nobody's air strikes and missile strikes in human history have ever been 100% effective. And then secondly, that 92% destruction of all incoming missiles is fact. If you don't agree with that, you are not a loyal American. You are not a patriot. You are lying. You are bad. You should be suppressed. Ideally, should be jailed. I mean, this is the sort of logic train that we're on. And it's depressing, but it pays well. And that's what people need to understand. You don't get paid anything for going on the mainstream media and saying, look, based on experience, I'd be surprised if 50% of these strikes were actually effective. We're hitting a lot of decoys. We're hitting things repeatedly, things we hit before, and we didn't have the desired effect. And by the way, it looks like our interception rate is probably closer to 50% or less. You've talked to Ted Postal. I've been down this road before with the United States Air Force, and I like them very much. But they have a theory that if you admit under any circumstances to missing anything, or you admit to being driven away because you can't penetrate the airspace or because you're taking heavy fire, well, then you're putting air power, quote unquote, at risk. If you do that, you're putting the future of the United States and its security at risk. Therefore, anything you say that may not be true is justified. This is crap. It's crap, and it needs to stop. But I see no evidence that anyone is going to stand up and try to stop anything at this point. Quite the contrary.
Well, in fact, let's continue on that same interview because this is bringing up and introducing a new problem for the administration. Now, President Trump was already going to have a problem when he came to the expiration of this 48-hour ultimatum that he foolishly set, because the Iranian side was ready to counter it and they were ready to go. And so far, they have done everything that they said they would do in retaliation. Now he's pushed it back 5 days, but he's only pushed it back 5 days. Now, this narrative here, going back to Greenwell, he's going to go much further than just saying something about introduction. He's saying we really don't even need to worry about negotiations because we're going to win this militarily. He's
doing a masterful job of it. He manufactured leverage. We need to let the president cook. Second, he's doing a masterful job of it. He manufactured leverage by stating we'll hit their power supply and power generation facilities if they don't stop within 48 hours. Lo and behold, we're in negotiations. And three, while he has a clear idea of where he's headed, the Iranians are in absolute chaos, mostly because their leadership's been decimated, but also because they're disconnected from one another. And so now they're arguing with themselves about how best to proceed. And in the end, I think a military solution is nearly done and will probably be the way this conflict ends.
So if he says that the military is nearly done and that's how we're going to do it, so we don't have to worry about negotiations. But what happens if we come up on Friday and they haven't negotiated, they haven't submitted, and we haven't won militarily? So what happens then?
Well, I think these negotiations are a trifle one-sided, especially since the Iranians aren't involved. That's the first point. Second point is militarily win. What are we winning? Is this the battleship Missouri scenario where the Iranians troop aboard the battleship Missouri sitting somewhere in the Persian Gulf and surrendered to Donald Trump? This is all nonsense. The man's not telling the truth. He's a shill for the administration. The Beltway's full of these people. And part of the reason is that people can't imagine anything else. I mean, you got to understand how we get here. First of all, we start something without any sort of strategic framework. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to pulverize the Iranians. Their regime is going to fall. There's a popular uprising and everything improves. We don't recognize that there are any limitations on our resources. There's no recognition that the American electorate might actually wake up and say, wait a minute, what are you doing? Their assumption is we're sheep. We'll all sleep through this. Failure to identify attainable strategic goals. What are the attainable strategic goals? Is it attainable to destroy the regime? That's failed. Are you just going to destroy the whole country, 93 million people, hundreds of thousands of square miles? Unlikely. What about your own military power? And this is very important because what we're seeing is not asymmetric warfare. What we're seeing is one side is trying to wage war the way we have certainly since about 1944. That's the old way of war. And we're facing an opponent who is waging a very different war against us. They're actually waging the war of the future in the 21st century. And that's a war of missiles, unmanned systems, as well as manned systems, a mix of everything, but maximum precision strike with a maximum of persistent surveillance. That's where we are. We're not going to win this war, not the way we're approaching it. And we can fire every last missile in our inventory, and we're going to discover that.
Now, one thing I want to ask Doug, going back again to your comment that there is from the administration and just the government itself and just the powers that be, this might be another example of that. Senator Ted Cruz, I guess a few days back, boasted on in an interview that he basically talked Trump into this war. He said, I got into the beast with him, his presidential limo, and we were in Florida, and I've talked to him, and I told him why this was so important, and he came out and agreed to do that. So first of all, Cruz took credit for convincing Trump to go. He probably has some competition with Lindsey Graham on that one, but we'll leave that for another day. But then he said this last night, that basically this has been an incredible success.
The first 3 weeks of this military conflict have been incredibly successful. In 3 weeks, we've taken out all of Iran's air defenses. We've taken out virtually every one of their short range and medium range ballistic missiles. We've taken out their missile production capacity. We've taken out their drone capacity. We've taken out their drone manufacturing. You look at what we've done to the Navy. We've had over 8,000 strikes in Iran and on the Navy. We have sunk more than 120 ships. This is the largest naval defeat, the most ships sunk since World War II. That's in 3 weeks. And in addition to that, we have decapitated the regime, taking out not just the Ayatollah, but the senior military leaders, the mullahs who have been tyrants in that country for 47 years. The outcome, I believe, should be simple and straightforward. We want to see a government in Iran that is not run by crazed Islamists who lead mobs chanting death to America.
So it's real simple, Doug. He just wants to see the regime changed in a way that we want, even though we don't have the power to make it happen. And then to your point there, he again goes back to World War II analogy that, we've sunk more ships than anything since World War II. And of course, we used a submarine to sink an unarmed ship not far from India when this thing began here. And they seem to be bragging on that. And I don't know. I don't even see any evidence that anyone's aware much less acknowledging that Iran has foreseen all this so that their actual Navy, the one that can be used in this, is underground so far and will come out at a time of their choosing to do things in the Strait if they need to. And then also they don't have an Air Force like we have because they're using missiles to pretty good effect so far. But this can't work. As you point out, you just got through making a good description of why this is not going to work. So one would imagine that, especially an official who wants to get reelected, is not going to say something that's going to be proven to be untrue later on. But it could be that he doesn't care about that or doesn't know because he has such contempt for the electorate that they'll vote for me anyway. Which of those things do you think is at play here?
Well, I think they all apply, frankly. Senator Cruz is the same senator who couldn't tell Tucker Carlson how many people lived in Iran. I doubt seriously he'd ever looked at the size of Iran, its terrain, its geography, to appreciate the true strategic challenge associated with waging war on a civilizational state that also happens to be a continental power. So what do you say? I wouldn't take him seriously. I think he's reading from the talking points that the White House and the Pentagon provide to all the retired generals. And again, a good example of the complete failure, to understand the impact of change on warfare. Well, we sank their Navy. What Navy? They had 7 old frigates, collection of other boats, and that hasn't stopped anyone in the Persian Gulf from interfering with shipping traffic. So I don't know what they're talking about. There really hasn't been an Iranian Air Force to speak of since the Shah departed. So again, this is back to the failure to understand what you're dealing with. I'm most concerned at this stage by people that talk this way, who are going to try and make the fallacious argument that was made recently by Lindsey Graham. President Trump, if you take Carg Island, the war's over. Right. So I have a feeling we're headed down that road. I think we're going to pay a horrendous price for that stupidity. But maybe that's unavoidable. Now, finally, you said, well, what's the problem? There are a lot of people out there, particularly in my generation, they watch the mainstream media. They believe whatever they're told. You would think at some point they would say, wait a minute, this is all nonsense. You would think somebody would wake up and say, wait a minute, President Trump, I voted for you. You haven't done what you said you were going to do. What happened to the effort to deal with the illegal alien problem in the United States? What are you doing to enforce federal law? By the way, 300,000 children in the United States effectively disappear every year. Is anybody doing anything about that? Why aren't we doing something about it? We're not killing 300,000 children or Americans in the Persian Gulf, but if we're losing 300,000 children inside the United States, I'd say that's a pretty big emergency. Doesn't come up for discussion. Nobody's paying for that. The whole thing is disgraceful. It's disgusting, but it's where we are. And eventually Americans are going to have to change this. But it's like everything else. It probably has to get worse before people wake up, smell the coffee, and demand change.
And, we have a lot of these World War II imagery because we love those because, we won World War II. We were the only ones that won. We can talk about that another day here, but it looks like Vietnam War is another one that we'd like to replicate, although I'm not sure why, since that didn't work out so well. But I mean, here's a couple of things. These are officially released CENTCOM charts. This is as of information from yesterday, and they're bragging about all these different assets you can see on the screen here. These are all the things we bring to the fight to show how incredible it is on the air, land, and sea, and we're just doing all this destruction. And then you see that those things have targets struck, 9,000 targets, combat flights, 9,000 plus, Iranian vessels damaged or destroyed, 140. So it's this statistics that we want to show. But then the question is, what do these statistics translate into on the ground?
Well, historically, the generals, and I imagine the admirals are in the same category, tend to understand only what they can count. They're very impressed by numbers. And this, of course, is extremely dangerous and misleading, particularly if you go back to Vietnam. I was listening to this discussion by Greenway about all these boats or ships or whatever they are that we claim that we sank in the Navy. I remember people talking about how many sampans we'd blown out of the water, on the Mekong River and the Mekong Delta. I served under officers who actually witnessed all sorts of insanity to the extent that we didn't get a high enough body count in the last battle. So we went out and chopped the dead in half. And then we doubled the body count. I mean, this sort of thing is depressing, but it seems to be a feature of the American military. If you can't quantify it, it doesn't mean anything. It's back to Schwarzkopf. How many tanks had we destroyed today? How many artillery pieces did? No. And then we found out that a lot of that was deception too. During the Kosovo air campaign, we saw the same thing. Oh, we destroyed hundreds of this and hundreds of that. It was all nonsense. 11 tanks, 12 self-propelled guns, 90 other assorted pieces of equipment, mostly wheeled, for 78 days of the air campaign. What kind of nonsense is that? In other words, it's all meaningless. And they don't know what else to do. They don't have an answer. And sadly, what they've done is they've said, okay, we're going to replicate Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder failed in Vietnam. This massive Air Force campaign, what did we do? We introduced ground forces. And how did that turn out? When the first people landed in Vietnam and South Vietnam, went ashore, they didn't even know what the objective was. It took time to figure out where they were going to go and what they were going to attack. It stayed that way for 8 years until we finally got the hell out. And I think we're going to find the same thing is true because these people are looking for something that doesn't exist. It's back to the Karg Island argument. If we take Karg Island, we win the war. Come on. It's not the way it works. It's never worked that way. They're looking for the silver bullet that's going to deliver victory, that will enable them to take credit for something good and then essentially disappear over the horizon until the next fiasco. I don't think it's going to work this time.
Well, yeah, and actually that's exactly what I want to talk about because we see that one of the potential coincidences is that the USS Tripoli with its amphibious landing dock USS New Orleans and the 2,200 Marines will be of the 31st Marine will be on station on Friday when that second deadline ends. There's also 82nd Airborne Troops, a brigade, I think at least in here. There's another, the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit steaming in with the USS Boxer. So the question is, what are they going to do? And can you just give us a little sense for whether it's Karg Island or something else? I personally think that the Karg Island is just a deception operation. I don't think anybody's actually going to go there because the difficulty would be too high. I don't know. Maybe they will. But whatever. You're talking maybe 5,000 Marines with the two MEUs and another few thousand from the 82nd Airborne. What can those organizations, what can that much ground combat power, along with the A-10s and the Apache helicopters, which have been sent over to support whatever they're going to do on the ground, what is feasible militarily for them to do?
It's important for Americans to understand something. What you do as a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine after you arrive is much more important than how fast you get there. Right now, the emphasis is on light and fast. Why are we sending a brigade for the 82nd? Well, because we can. You load up 3,000 men. Now, of course, the Army, as always, has said, well, if we're going to send a brigade, we have to have a division headquarters on the ground to manage it. So 3,000 troops need a 2-star general with a 1-star general as deputy and probably 150, 200, maybe more people to plan and conduct operations. This is a sort of standard, World War II nonsense that we go through. And then the Marines. We're going to put Marines there because we can float them in, and then we can put them somewhere. Well, the problem is once you put the paratrooper on the ground, once you put the Marine on the ground, the Ranger, whoever it is, what are they going to do? What can they do? Are they going to seize and hold something of great value? What is the seizure about? If they go to an island, can they hold that island? Well, I think we're finding out that islands are extremely vulnerable. Unless it's the size of Borneo, that means that all sorts of precision strike missiles and unmanned systems can annihilate everything on the island. So if you think you're going to go on an island and then hold it for what? What's the benefit? How does it help you? And see, from the Iranian standpoint, they're probably sitting there asking themselves, how could we be this stupid? And we shouldn't get confused. We're not saying that Marines or soldiers or anybody else are not good, solid people that are well trained and reasonably well led, I hope, and disciplined. It's not the point. Is what are they going to do when they get there? And how much can you expect of them? So that's why I go back to this thing of, well, we'll seize the islands. Now, if you look at the straits, and this is very hot, very important. I just wrote a piece on Substack that goes into some detail on this. If you go through all the thinking and then you say, well, I'm going to introduce ground troops and I'm going to seize the straits. What does that mean? If you look at the sides of the strait, in other words, the coastline, you're talking about 1,000 feet of cliff. In other words, this is an uphill climb in the worst sense of the word. Are you then going to land troops further to the east and then make the long march around to take it from the landward side? I mean, what are you doing? If you're going to put them on an island, once they're sitting on the island, what kind of control or influence are they going to assert? And the answer is none, because the place will be pulverized. It'll be covered by rockets and missiles. Anything on it will be exterminated. I mean, that's the easy thing to do. What else would you do? Now, of course, if you're going to make the argument that the Iranians are running out of missiles, which reminds me of the Russian army running out of missiles and rockets and so forth, then maybe it's fine. Maybe you could go there and open the chaise lounge chair and take in some sun. But the point is, I don't think so. And I don't think that you can stop from 150 kilometers away all sorts of weapons being launched against those sites. And again, we're back to persistent surveillance. What are you going to do that's going to fool anybody? Where are you going to stage forces? Are you going to try and stage them in Kuwait, in Bahrain? Are you going to try and stage out of Oman? I doubt seriously the Omanis will be receptive to that idea. Are you going to try and stage out of the UAE? Anywhere you go or you try to mass forces, it's going to be picked up, it's going to be targeted, and you're going to be brought under effective fire. So the problem with all of this is, do we have these capabilities? Yeah, we got lots of light infantry. Much of it's good. It'll go where you send it. But what are you asking it to do? And I think at the moment, we're asking them to do the impossible, to exert control over geography that they can't control. It's not a question of, are there not enough of them? It's simply a question of surveillance and strike. And if you don't have that advantage, if you can't rob the enemy of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and you can't defeat his intermediate range or tactical ballistic missiles and so forth, what are you going to do? Perhaps we're going to have to go through this in order to learn this lesson the hard way.
And just real briefly, what about this? Because there's a lot of things swirling around, and a lot of the rumor mills that actually these troops, especially these light fighters, are actually being sent to do a seizure operation to get those 400 kilograms of reprocessed material and prevent Iran from ever turning them into a nuclear bomb. What is the possibility? We have a lot of good people that can do things. We've seen how SEAL Team 6 went and took out bin Laden. We've seen how we just took Maduro out here. Can something like that work?
Well, there's gold in the Amazon jungles. Why don't you go find it? Good luck. I mean, you're looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. Now, you can try and detect things using satellite imagery as well as other means of detection overhead to see whether or not you found something that's radioactive. But I'm not sure you're going to end up with what you're looking for. It doesn't take that much material to alert somebody in space or flying overhead. What if you alert on 15, 20 places? Do you line them up and go to them in succession? How do you get there? Are you going to fly in a helicopter? Helicopters are so vulnerable. You can knock them down with rocks. So how do you get in and get out without being detected? And that's the biggest problem I have with all of these assumptions. The other thing is, I read recently, somebody said, we may need as many as 200,000 troops. If you go back to the Dardanelles in 1915, it started really in earnest in February of 1915. It lasted for 9 months. They went in initially, these are the straits between Turkey and Europe, what we call the Bosporus. And the idea was that you seize the straits so that you could pass the Royal Navy through. They can then take Constantinople, now Istanbul, under direct fire. You can land more troops and seize the capital.